Derek Chisora gains revenge over Kubrat Pulev with a 12-round split decision win. Let's talk about it. Well, going into the fight, I was curious to see how Derek Chisora would react when he got hit clean, because in the Joseph Parker fight, he seemed to show significant deterioration as far as punch resistance. Bear in mind, this is a guy in Parker who he'd fought before, and in their first fight, I never noticed, or I can't recall, Derek Chisora being hurt or seriously wobbled. But in the rematch, he was wobbled on multiple occasions. So for me, there was deterioration in terms of punch resistance. Now, Kubrat Pulev has never been a massive puncher, but he's got a very strong left hand. He wobbled Vladimir Klitschko with that strong jab, really, in the first round. And if he was able to hit Chisora with a shot like that, I thought in my head, it's going to be interesting to see what effects it has on him. Pulev's right hand has never been particularly accurate and it's never been particularly powerful. So I wasn't sure whether he would be able to hurt Chisora with that hand, but the left hand for Pulev has been generally a powerful hand, particularly with the jab. He's actually dropped people with his jab. Now, as far as Kubrat Pulev, he has actually been on some decent form recently. He's picked up a couple wins since the Anthony Joshua loss, one of them against Jerry Forrest. And Forrest is seen as a journeyman, but he gave the Chinese heavyweight Zhang lots of trouble. Even though he was dropped several times in that fight, he rallied and gave Zhang lots of trouble. And more recently, Michael Hunter went life and death with Jerry Forrest. Kubrat Pulev beat Forrest far more convincingly and comfortably than either of those guys. And these are guys who are much younger than Kubrat Pulev. Actually, Zhang isn't much younger, but Michael Hunter's much younger. So, going into the fight, I thought that Pulev would be the fresher guy. Now, from the opening bell, to me, it looked exactly that way. Pulev seemed a lot fresher to me. Chisora showed quite a lot of deterioration as far as I'm concerned. His feet, and look, Chisora's never been a fast heavyweight, but here he looked slow as molasses, particularly his feet. If you go back and watch Chisora when he fought Alexander Usyk, he was much faster in terms of foot speed, hand speed. There was much more velocity in his forward momentum and so on. He just had a lot more energy against Alexander Usyk than he showed here against Kubrat Pulev. He was really forcing his way forward. And I know Kubrat Pulev is a very physically strong guy because there were times when Chisora was trying to come forward and let the shots go, and Pulev was able to wrap him up and push him back with relative ease. This shows you the strength of Kubrat Pulev. He's very physically strong. But Chisora's fought strong people before. There just didn't seem to be the same energy in this fight from Chisora than I've seen in previous Chisora fights. And to me, that was a sign of the age. The slowing of the feet, even slower hand speed than normal, but his heart is just as strong and just as big as ever. Huge heart this guy's got. And in the first round, Pulev, here's the thing about Chisora though. He looked very slow in there. Even his head movement looked slow, but his head movement was consistent. And that was enough to actually nullify Kubrat Pulev's offense. Pulev found it very, very difficult to hit Derek Chisora. There were many sequences in this fight where Pulev was letting off several shots, 4, 5, 6 shots, and nearly all of them missed because of Derek Chisora's constant head movement. So I have to big up Chisora and Don Charles for the work that they did for this fight in keeping Derek's head in perpetual motion, constantly moving, so that it was difficult for Pulev to get shots on. Derek and Don Charles apparently also worked on blocking Pulev's uppercut. Remember, he had fought Pulev before, so blocking Pulev's uppercut. And for the most part, they did a good job on that. Apart from one incident, I think it was in the second half of the fight, where Pulev's uppercut finally did land, and he'd been trying for the uppercut all night, but Chisora had been blocking it. But this time he didn't block it, and Chisora was wobbled. You guys, I'm sure, know the incident I'm talking about. The first round with these two guys was like round 13 of the first fight, because their first fight was an absolute hugfest. It was a horrible fight. Pulev jabbed and grabbed his way to victory. This time around, Pulev wasn't allowed to grab. The referee was onto him early, and there were several stern warnings, and Pulev therefore had to lay off the holding. He was still doing some holding throughout the fight, but he had to keep it to a relative minimum. He wasn't able to hold excessively like he did first time around or like he did in the first round. And that really can make a huge difference in a fight. See, this is why I was such a skeptic of Vladimir Klitschko for so long, because I was thinking, what would a Povetkin fight really look like if he wasn't able to hold as excessively as he did when they fought? I think it could have been very, very different. I mean, more different than the first Pulev-Chisora fight versus the second Pulev-Chisora fight. I think a prime Povetkin versus a prime Klitschko, if Klitschko ain't allowed to hold at all, is a very, very different fight. And I think there would have been many other fights during Klitschko's career. Vladimir I'm talking about here, because Vitaly didn't really hold that much. But Vladimir was terrible with the holding. If anyone can look at that first Povetkin fight, in fact, there's a video that I've talked about many times. Go and watch a video called Vladimir Klitschko Illegal Tactics. Watch that video and then try and tell me that that is not the worst case of excessive holding you've ever seen in a championship fight, because it certainly is for me. People would bring up Muhammad Ali and Lennox Lewis and Henry Akinwande when he fought Lennox Lewis. Oh, those were worse. They were not even close to the excessive holding that was present in the Klitschko-Povetkin fight. That's far worse than anything I've ever seen in a championship fight. Shocking. You should have been disqualified for all that. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. The point I'm making here is, if you take that excessive holding away from a guy, because he's using it not only as defense, but also as a way to shut down the other guy's offense, if you take that away, it can completely change the complexion of a fight. And so that was instrumental in Derek Chisora having the success he had here against Pulev in the rematch. Pulev was the more active guy. He was throwing more punches, but so many of them were missing because of Chisora's head movement. The longer the fight went, the less Pulev was able to keep his distance, the more he was in range of Chisora. And I guess after taking a few big swipes from Chisora, right, Chisora landed some clean shots on Pulev. I think Pulev realized that Chisora couldn't hurt him and that Chisora's power wasn't that great, relatively speaking. So he was more willing to stand in range and go for the knockout. To me, Pulev looked like he was aiming for a knockout the whole fight. I think he'd probably looked at that Parker rematch and thought, yeah, this guy's punch resistance is gone. I need to sit down on my shots and get this guy out of there. And he did try, and he certainly did wobble Chisora. I don't think Pulev was ever hurt in this fight. There were moments where he got knocked off balance for a second, but if you look at his eyes and look at his knees, from watching it live, I didn't see that Pulev was ever hurt. One thing I will say, though, is that there was often occasions where Chisora was up against the ropes and he would sling a big shot over the top and it would catch Pulev on the cheek or on the chin, but Pulev was moving back at the same time. So even though it landed flush and spray went flying everywhere, Pulev was moving backwards rather than moving forwards. And that does take a lot of the impact off the shot, despite how it looks. So that's one thing I will say. But yeah, Chisora used all of the experience that he's had in his career to line up his shots, even though a lot of them looked extremely sloppy. And when he was coming forward, Chisora looked worse than when he was up against the ropes and throwing these counters. Because when he was coming forward, he was reaching with his punches so much. You know, the foot speed just wasn't there. And it looked so much more sloppy than when he decided to go up against the ropes and counter Pulev. So it was a good fight. It turned out to be a much better fight than the first fight because of the ref stopping all the holding. And in terms of the way it was scored, you know, the second half of the fight, particularly in the championship rounds, there was some real excellent, thrilling action. With Chisora coming back from being hurt, hitting Pulev with big shots, them going back and forth toe-to-toe. Pulev, of course, being cut, several cuts. I think he had at least 2 or 3 cuts, and bad ones as well. The cut over the eye, they managed to stem the blood flow from that cut real quick. Remember, it happened in one round and it was a real bad cut, but then in the next round, it wasn't bleeding at all. So them cutmen did a fantastic job. Or maybe it's just that Pulev has got really leathery skin. He doesn't have much blood beneath the surface. I don't know. He has one of them kind of leathery looking faces. But yeah, the action was real good. Pulev got cut. And I think that also incentivized Pulev to try and get Chisora out of there when he got cut, because he seemed to become more aggressive when he'd been cut. Maybe he was worried about them stopping the fight. So he's thinking, okay, now I really got to knock this guy out. But obviously, from a visual perspective, when a guy's cut and he's bleeding and the other guy's not bleeding, and then he lands a couple big shots on you, again, psychologically can sway the judges. So anyway, let's talk about the judges. Let's talk about the scorecards. 116-112 to Chisora, 116-112 to Pulev, and then a 116-114, I think it was. The other card, was it 114-112? Because the third card by Steve Gray, there was only 2 rounds in it for Chisora. Now, I don't see 116-112 for either guy. You know, and 2 of the judges had it 116-112. I don't see that for either guy. I think if you're going to give it to Pulev or Chisora, you have it by a round, 2 rounds, 3 at the most. But having it 8 rounds to 4 for either guy, I don't see it. I'm not sure what that's all about. I suspect that there was some incentive. There was some impetus. I'm struggling to find the correct word to describe what I mean. But I think the boxing establishment in Britain wanted to give Chisora a close decision. Do you know what I mean? I think if this, never mind this being in Bulgaria, I think if this was in neutral territory, I think Pulev would probably have gotten the decision, a close decision. Overall, I think Pulev just did a bit more. You know, there was rounds where Chisora landed the eye-catching shots, yes, but there were so many rounds where he was doing virtually nothing, landed a few body shots, but Pulev was the one landing all the headshots, and Pulev was far more active. You know, one thing I will say, though, is that Pulev's jab was just a pulling jab in this fight. I don't know if he's had an issue with his shoulder or whatever, but Pulev used to have a very powerful jab. There was no evidence of that here. His jab here was just a pulling, flicking jab. There's really nothing on it. Maybe it's, again, because of the fact that Chisora was moving his head so much. Because Pulev was always a guy who would put so much force into his jab that if it missed, his left fist would be like a foot behind the back of your head. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's how much power he will put into his jab. Maybe they've decided to correct. Maybe they feel like that makes him too vulnerable to right hands. You know, if he misses the jab, he's going to walk into a right hand. I don't know. But that powerful jab that Pulev was so famous for was completely absent in this fight. It was absent in the AJ fight too, to be fair. Anyway, yeah, I thought that, I don't want to say they did Chisora a favor, but they gave him the benefit of the doubt here, I think, because of what a servant he's been for British boxing. And I thought it was quite funny when Chisora was in, well, you know, when they were still in the ring at the end of the fight and they were interviewing him, and he said that Eddie Hearn needs to start paying him some proper money or he's going to go see the other people. I guess he means Sky and Ben Shalom. Maybe I'll do a separate video about that, whether Eddie Hearn is underpaying fighters, because a lot of fighters are saying this kind of stuff now. And I think that is a subject worthy of discussion. Is Eddie Hearn underpaying fighters? Was Derek Chisora just being facetious because, you know, he likes to wind Eddie Hearn up a lot? Or does he have any kind of genuine intention of going to Sky and with Ben Shalom or what have you? You guys let me know what you think in the comments below, but he enjoyed putting Eddie Hearn on the spot like that when Eddie Hearn's under pressure right now from other people. Felix Cash pulled out. They say it was an illness, but recently Felix Cash has been acting like he's not that happy with Eddie Hearn. Billy Joe Saunders, he's come out on social media acting like he's not that happy with Eddie Hearn with regards to Eddie not returning his calls or not getting back to him. Eddie's lost Joseph Parker, Liam Smith. It looks like he may be losing Lawrence Okolie. It's not going well for Eddie Hearn at the moment. And if you can't see that, as I said in a recent video, you're in some serious denial. Right? Things are not going the way Eddie Hearn might want them to go. But I'll talk about that more in a separate video. So yeah, that was interesting from Derek Chisora in the ring, putting Eddie Hearn on the spot like that. I want to talk briefly about the undercard because I haven't seen all the fights yet. I saw Fabio Wardley. I saw Solomon Dakers as well. I'm yet to be impressed by Dakers. Maybe he's fighting within himself and he's trying to just work on specific things and he'll be more impressive as he steps his level of opposition up. But from what I've seen so far, I haven't been impressed with Solomon Dakers. He looks very pedestrian from what I've seen so far. But as I say, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's got a lot more in the tank, a lot more in the locker. But yeah, I wasn't particularly impressed by his performance. It just was what it was. It looked like a generic British fighter's performance at this stage. Now with Fabio Wardley, he was supposed to be fighting a guy called eBay, an African guy whose surname is eBay, excuse me, which sounds like the auction site, but it's not spelt that way. And I saw eBay get beaten up horrifically and taken out by Jared Anderson a year or two ago. And that eBay guy is a very muscular, big, strong guy. Would have been interesting to see how Fabio Wardley did versus him and compare the performance to the Jared Anderson performance against the same opponent. But eBay was apparently denied entry into the UK for whatever reason. I don't know if got a record or he's been deported from the UK before. I don't know. But he was denied entry. And so they brought some journeyman in for Fabio Wardley to knock over in a couple rounds. Excuse me. Shout out to the journeyman for, you know, taking the fight on short notice and allowing Fabio to get a little run out. Fabio dealt with him the way that you're supposed to deal with a journeyman. He didn't hang about, didn't mess about. He got stuck in, hit the guy with big shots, and ended the fight. When was it? In the second round? So he did what he had to do. And I was comparing them at the time when I was watching it to, I was comparing Fabio Wardley's performance to Solomon Daker's performance. Now, Solomon Daker's opponent was better, but he still wasn't great. And when I compare the two performances, Wardley's just got more spite. And I think it's a fair comparison. Even though Wardley's had more pro fights, he didn't have the amateur background that Solomon Daker's had. So I think it's a fair comparison. And Wardley's just far more spiteful and purposeful in terms of the way he goes about his work. Whereas Solomon Daker's was just, I'm not impressed by that performance from Daker's. And I haven't been impressed by any of his performances so far. Nothing against the guy. And as I say, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he raises his game to the level of opposition. But those are the two fights that I saw in the undercard. Then there was the main event itself, which turned out to be a pretty good fight. Now, in terms of where Chisora goes from here, where Pulev goes from here, maybe I'll talk about Pulev in a separate video, but Chisora has a few options because Pulev, I believe, was still ranked in the top 15 by at least one of the sanctioning bodies. Chisora says he'd like to fight Deontay Wilder. There's also the possibility of him fighting Areola, a Hellenius rematch maybe, a trilogy with Dillian Whyte. Out of all those fights, I would say Areola and Dillian Whyte would be the best ones for Derek Chisora. I think that Chisora, Dillian Whyte 3 would be interesting because Chisora is physically, in terms of his foot movement and all that kind of stuff, virtually shot. His foot speed is awfully slow now. The only thing that's still good about Chisora is the heart is still there and he still moves his head well. But Kubrat Pulev, although has faster hand speed than Derek Chisora, he still doesn't have anywhere near the hand speed of the top heavyweights around. So will that head movement of Chisora's be as effective against, younger guys? Will it even be as effective against the Dillian Whyte? That remains to be seen. I think Whyte Chisora 3 right now is actually pretty interesting. Do you know what I mean? Because Whyte just doesn't have any punch resistance anymore. But I think that physically he still has more than Chisora in terms of his foot speed and hand speed. Yeah, I think Whyte has got more foot speed and hand speed than Chisora at this stage. And I think maybe he always did, but the gap in foot speed and hand speed I think is wider now because Chisora has slowed down an awful lot based on that Pulev fight. You see it. So I think that's an interesting one between Chisora and Whyte if they have a trilogy fight. I'm sure Whyte probably thinks that he's past a Chisora trilogy at this stage and that he wants to fight one of the elite guys or whatever. But me as a neutral, as an outsider looking in, I don't see it that way. And I think that Dylan's probably going to get absolutely poleaxed if he's in there with a Wilder or any of the top guys. So I think Chisora, Whyte 3 makes sense if both guys want to carry on their careers. Chisora against Areola I think is good, as I've said. Now Chisora against Deontay Wilder. A few years ago, I would have given Chisora a decent shot, just based on styles. I know people say, oh, what a load of rubbish, you would always got wiped out by Wilder. Yeah, I don't think so. Wilder's got just a straight right hand. That's all he's got. Doesn't have much of an uppercut. Doesn't have much of a left hook. His jab is decent, but it's nothing special. Wilder's a straight right hand. It's a very fast, very powerful right hand. He times it well. He's got good distance, but that's all you've got to watch out for with Deontay is just a straight right hand. So if I'm thinking about Chisora from a few years ago, constantly moving his head, and he's only got to watch out for a straight right hand, and he's coming in low, bobbing and weaving out of a crouch. How many opportunities is Wilder actually going to get to land that shot? He needs Chisora to stand up straight in order to land it, He doesn't have as shorter arms as a Joseph Parker or as Alexander Usyk, so the shots are not coming in as thick and fast from Wilder as they are from those guys. You see what I'm saying? And also Wilder's having to punch down because he's much taller than those guys. So a few years ago, I'd say that's an interesting fight. I'm not saying that I would necessarily pick Chisora to win, but I'd give him a good chance. Chisora of a few years ago, I want to say, would have a 40% chance of beating Wilder. That's what I'd give him. Today, I would say a lot less chance than that, but his only saving grace at this stage is that head movement. He move his head all over the place, constantly bobbing and weaving, but I just don't think he has the foot speed now. Not that he's ever had extremely quick foot speed, but it was quicker than it is now. A few years ago, a lot quicker. I mean, you look at the Usyk fight, he was able to close range quick on Usyk, and Usyk's got very fast feet. So Chisora of a few years ago with the faster feet, good chance, I would say, of beating Wilder. But today, I mean, how many times can he move that head and stay out of the way of Wilder's shots? Because it's not like it used to be. A few years ago, he would move his head as he's coming forward, as he's tracking you down. So it's not just a case of him avoiding your shots. He's also landed his own over the top. Whereas now, if he fights Wilder, is Wilder going to find it that difficult to maintain range and stay away from Chisora? As slow as Chisora's feet are now? I don't think he would. So it's going to be a case of Chisora moving his head, but not getting close enough to land his own shots. You see it, unless Wilder is deteriorated. I mean, we have to take ring rust into consideration. Let's say Wilder comes out of his, or comes off his layoff now and fights Chisora in his next fight. Chisora would have been the more active guy. Would Wilder be ring rusty enough for it to even up the scales a little bit and for Chisora to win? Possibly. I guess I should take that into consideration. But you would think that the Wilder fight would likely end in a brutal knockout of Derek Chisora. And do we really want to see that? I mean, Chisora's got a massive heart. I've said this several times before, but maybe I've played too many video games in my youth. But you know that certain characters in video games have different attributes. And in some games, like even in boxing games, you can give your fighter certain attributes, right? Imagine if you could give Derek Chisora's chin, or not even Derek Chisora's chin, because the chin ain't that great anymore. I meant to say heart. Imagine if you could give Anthony Joshua Derek Chisora's heart. Imagine what a fighter AJ would be with that type of heart, where Derek Chisora just does not care. He will go into a fight and give everything, not caring if he gets knocked out. He puts it all on the line. And in fact, I think it's good that AJ has reconnected with Chisora. I know they've always spoken over the years, ever since the days that AJ was an amateur and, was training with and sparring with Chisora at Finchley. But it seems in the past year or so, maybe past couple years, they've started to get closer again. And I think for this fight here, for AJ Usyk too, it's good to have a guy like Derek Chisora around. Maybe Chisora's mentality will rub off on AJ a bit, That balls to the wall, just devil-may-care attitude. He needs that. And maybe he'll be inspired by what he saw from his older, Uncle Derek, the guy that helped him really back in the days in AJ's amateur career and whatnot by sparring with him. So, yeah, that's what I have to say about the Chisora Pulev fight. Turned out to be a good one in the end, much better than the first fight. Funny that Chisora was embarrassing Eddie in the ring. Talked about the scorecards, what they do after, a little bit about the undercard. Let me know what you guys feel about it all in the comments section below. And finally, yeah, if only, AJ could have Derek Chisora's heart, because Derek Chisora's got balls like King Kong. That's got balls like King Kong, and that's what AJ is going to need in that Usyk rematch. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high-quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and it's 100% censorship free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment. You can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.